Hi everyone, welcome to today's video in which we're going to make a start on a waistcoat. A waistcoat is one of my favorite garments, and I decided that I had a sincere lack of waistcoats to use to wear to work. I own one waistcoat, I think, and that's not really work suitable. And also as a way to incorporate my hobbies into my daily wear more than making stuff like this, I decided to go the historical way. And for this we're going to use the Black Snail's 1890s ladies vest pattern. It's actually meant to be worn with a corset, but I already checked the measurements, and if I size up one size, I think it should fit me without a corset. So I'm looking forward to this. I already bought the fabric in the fabric haul, so you will know a bit what I'm going to use for it. So without further ado, let's get sewing. Here we are with the mock-up for the waistcoat. I'm currently wearing it over a light sweater because that's probably the way that I'm going to wear this to the office. And honestly, pretty much just like my last mock-ups, it's good in one go. I quite like the fit, I like the length. I think it looks quite good. The darts are all in the right place. I'm not exactly sure how wide these are going to be, so I just folded them over in some way. I should maybe mark them on here. But this is the mock-up of the waistcoat. So yeah, I think that fits in one go. Which means that now we can actually start cutting out the actual fabric and start working on the actual thing. For this waistcoat we are going to use 4 different fabrics. The outer layer will be a green wool poly blend. The lining, which will also form the back, will be made from a synthetic brown fabric with green deer. And there are 2 fabrics which will not be seen. These are the interlining, made from a sturdy cotton, and the interfacing, made from a medium weight linen. Then we can start thread tracing all the pieces. All of the marks and notches get a nice and bright color. And the seam lines are basted in white, at 1.5 centimeters from the edge. In hindsight, I thread traced a bit much, as most of the marks on the interlining will be hidden between the outside fabric and the interfacing anyway. A good one to remember if I'd ever make it again. And after approximately multiple weeks of basting, I'm finally done basting all of these pieces. You would think a waistcoat is not that big of a garment, but there are quite a lot of pieces involved. Because this is going to be a form-fitting, intricate garment, I decided to baste everything again for a change. So you can also see all of the markings where the buttons will end up. Center front, waistline, all that sort of stuff. So here we are, everything is basted, and we can finally start sewing. The nice thing about doing all this thread tracing is that you can pull the 2 layers apart, cut through all of the threads, and then you have a nice overview of all your stitch lines and markings. This is also the moment after which you will mysteriously find tiny wet threads all around your house. Now we can actually start doing some sewing stuff. I do not trust the lining enough to hold the back by itself, so I am flatlining it with the interlining fabric. Then we can finally start on the instructions. First, we're going to sew the 2 back parts together. The seam allowance in the back is finished by cutting one side shorter than the other and folding it over. After pinning in the seam allowance, the pattern says edge stitch from the wrong side of the fabric. This pattern actually includes quite a lot of explanations on how to do what and the kind of stitches that you have to use, except edge stitching. So let me Google on how to actually do some edge stitching, and then we will finish this seam allowance. And it's only a few seconds later, as apparently edge stitching is just machine top stitching, but closer to the edge. I would have expected to already have to use hand sewing here, but apparently also looking at the pattern, you can see 2 lines of stitches here, which means that the stitch that we will do now is just machine stitched, and it's visible on the other side. After giving the seam a nice press, it ends up like this. Looking quite fancy, if I may say so myself. Next up are the darts. For this we pin the 2 thread traced lines on top of each other and sew them together. These seams are then ironed towards the side seam. After the darts, the bottom edge is finished by folding it over twice and sewing it in place. Then we can start on the buckle straps. These are sewn all around the edge with the usual 1.5 cm seam allowance. Apparently the tension of the sewing machine had different ideas than I had when sewing just 2 pieces of lining fabric. Hopefully a bit of ironing will even this out. Which means that after ironing I can cut short the seam allowances and turn them inside out and iron them again. And then we should have 2 buckle straps. For the turning I use a paintbrush. The tip has a nice rounded edge, which can push against the fabric but not poke through it. The last thing we are going to do for the straps at this point is to baste them to the back. They will be sewn in properly later when we sew the side seam. And with that, we've nearly got a full back. Now, I'm absolutely not here to bash this pattern at all, but I am going to mention everything that I run into. Which means that now they tell me to neaten the armholes with a small strip cut on the bias. This was not listed in the cutting instructions. It is shown on the cutting diagram, but considering this is for view B, and these diagrams are for both view A and B, I did not necessarily look at which thing was for which part. I just cut everything that was on here. It also doesn't tell you how long, which is only mentioned in the part that you're actually going to use them. So I will be cutting some strips of 3 cm wide and 14 inches long, which I'll have to recalculate how much that is. So I will be cutting some bias strips and then we can continue. Once the strips were cut, they could be attached to the armholes. The seam allowance can be cut back and ironed over. Then the seam is understitched close to the edge. Finally, the other half can be folded over and edge stitched in place. And with this, we are done with the back and we can start on the front. For the front, we first flatline the front pieces in the same manner as we did the back. Then the darts can be sewn in. So this is also the moment where the pattern tells me to do a quick test fit by pinning all the seams together, which is what I've done here. I will make this short because it's very cold in here, and excuse the kids' noises because we're having a snow day. So they're all playing outside in front of my bedroom window. Anyway, apparently this pattern is slightly tighter than I anticipated, as in the overlap here is bigger than I thought. Because you can see the pink line here, which is absolutely not overlapping with the pink line here. And they're supposed to be laying on top of each other, but that's not really possible. It might be, but I can't pin it properly like that. But other than that, I'm really happy with it. I mean, there's a little bit of creasing going on, but that's also because, well, I've still got all the seam allowances around my arms. Let's see if I can show the back while I'm holding the camera. And there we go. So yeah, I think that's looking quite nice. Also, it's inside out right now because I pinned it like this and I did not feel like wearing the pins on the inside. So this means that we can actually continue sewing this. Because this wasn't clear to me from the pattern, I cut out the darts from the interfacing without any allowance. And because it is a fabric that could start fraying, I zigzagged the edges of the darts. After that, the interfacing can be basted to the front panel all the way through. The basting will be removed at the end. Because there is some allowance made for the collar to turn over, we are basting the collar part separately while it is turned. This is what it looks like with the interface basted to the inside and the outside of the vest. As if there weren't enough lines yet. But as you can already slightly see, this is the line where the collar will eventually fold over. And you can already see that it does want to start to take its shape because we basted it on while it was folded over. Next up, we can finally start joining the pieces. I should maybe have read up a bit further ahead because you have to pull away the canvas, and because I basted it quite high, might prove a tiny bit difficult. Anyway, let's just pull back the canvas. And now we can sew these two pieces together on the center back of the collar. Of course, right sides together. Now that the collar is sewn together, we can trim off the seam allowance, at least trim it a bit shorter. And we're going to press open the seam. This is interesting because the canvas is actually going to have to lay flat over this again. So I guess I'll just have to iron those back again once it's time for them. Smooth out the canvas over the seam allowance. I basted this up too high because now I cannot smooth this back over again, so that means I will have to cut loose some of the basting. Smooth out the canvas of both sides over the center back and trim back the seam allowance to 1/4 inch. Now that these are cut back, I will iron them again so that they actually lay flat. And then we catch stitch the canvas together. I knew practicing new stitches in my Regency dress would come in handy. The catch stitch is used multiple times throughout this waistcoat. And that's it for the first part of this waistcoat. This is what it currently looks like. I just pinned it on here, so the fit isn't perfect, but I'm quite happy with the color combination. The green and the brown really work together. So in the next part we will be finishing the inside and eventually attaching the front and the back together. I'm really looking forward to see what it eventually will end up looking like. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed watching. As usual, if you have any questions about either the process or anything in general, please don't hesitate to ask them in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And I hope to see you guys next time.